Once you've created a virtual network within Windows Azure, then the next few steps are to go in and configure the network as per your requirements, and most notably to add in some resources, in particular some virtual machines to that network. So let's have a quick look at how we can see some of those values and how we can get a virtual machine set up within this network. So I've already created my first network, and there it is right there, and I can just click on this, and we can see that under the dashboard there's no resources currently assigned. So we're going to do that shortly. But if we go to our configure option here, we can also see what we were given in terms of the address space. And obviously this was based on whatever you set, but you certainly can go ahead and make some changes to your configuration if need be. So for example, the address space that we went with when we created it was the 192.168.0.0. And our starting IP is 0 and goes up in this case to 254, but you see that there's only 251 usable addresses. Note that the very first one that's usable is 0.4. So the reason they do that is for some of the VPN connectivity, and that's an upcoming topic as well. But for the time being, just take note that our first usable address is 0.4 up to 254, and we've got our first subnet here, which is in fact the entire address space. So just to see some of the changes that can be made, let's go ahead and change this. Let's maybe divide this up into some smaller units. So let's just go one more bit here and go with a /25 to make a smaller subnet, and you can see that that cuts the range off now to 126, still starting at 4. So we'll save that change, and that will just take a second to update. Okay, so that's successfully updated. And then maybe what we can do is add in a second subnet. So our subnet 2, obviously in this case, it can only begin at 128 and go through to the end of that space. And that's perfectly fine. So we'll just leave that as is, and we'll save that. And that should only take a second to update as well. But those are just some examples of the configuration changes you can make. So the other thing that we'll do now that's updating is we'll go ahead and create a new virtual machine. So let's go to our virtual machine option, create a virtual machine, and when you do want to assign it to the virtual network, then you actually have to go to the gallery option here. So we'll just choose that. And we'll just go with a fairly basic system here. Windows Server 2008 R2 is perfectly fine for this demonstration. And like anything, you just have to give it a name. So let's go with VM Server 08 and assign a username. So right here, what you can see is that there's always a cloud service associated with a virtual machine, and we can just create a new one that hosts the virtual machine, if you will. Or you can see that there's actually one created specifically for that VM, and the DNS name is set by default, and that's all fine. But under the region affinity group or virtual network here, now you can see that we have this choice to choose any virtual network that we might have, and obviously we could have more than one. Since we only have one, that one's already set by default. But since this network has two subnets, we can place it in either subnet. So we'll just go with the first one. It doesn't matter for this demonstration here. Storage account, we can just tell it to automatically generate one, or there's, again, already one present, maybe from a previous virtual machine. Doesn't matter. You can use either one. So we'll just leave everything pretty much here at the defaults. Next that. Leave these at their defaults and OK that. And that's going to take a couple of minutes to provision the new virtual machine, but we'll check back as soon as that finishes, and we'll see that this VM has now been placed into the virtual network. So we'll let that go about its business, and then we'll check back. Okay, so our virtual machine still starting, but it has been provisioned, and what we can see now is that if we go and look at our virtual network, we can now click on a network, and if we go to our dashboard now, we will see that in fact that virtual machine has successfully been provisioned on this virtual network, and it's been assigned the first available IP address of 0.4. So we've successfully placed our virtual machine onto our virtual network.